I can walk through the cemetery and read headstones. And from that reading, I can know their name and the date of birth and the date of death. But I have no way of knowing if they became who they were supposed to be. You see, because when God creates us, He has a unique design for each one of us. How do we know who we're supposed to be? Most of us are shaped by our parental figures, our experiences, our environment. And most of these things, they influence us to prioritize the pursuit of things. And so, in all actuality, we don't really pursue who we're supposed to be. We invest ourselves in what we want to have, like a job, our possessions, our status. As a matter of fact, when children are growing up, we ask them the question, what do you want to be? When what we really mean is, what do you want to do when you grow up? The question really should be, who are you? And that question comes before, what do you do? But many of us don't really understand how to help people to discover the who that they are. We just set them on the path of the what they're supposed to have, like go to school, get an education, so that you can get a good job, so that you can, what's the conclusion of that? Make good money. But the pursuit shouldn't be things, the pursuit should be who I am before what I do. As a matter of fact, we see that with Jesus. When Jesus was baptized, before He did anything, what was affirmed was who He was. And who did that affirmation come from? It came from His Father. His Father let Him know who He was and how He felt about Him before the what He did and before Jesus did anything. Genesis 32, in verse 26 through 28, gives us the account of Jacob wrestling with the angel. And in that verse, the angel says to Jacob, let me go because the day is breaking. But Jacob says, I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. And so the angel replies to him, well, what is your name? And he says, Jacob. And the angel says, well, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. Now, you and I, we think of the blessing as being something tangible. But in this divine encounter, Jacob received the greatest of blessings, a new name. Now, the blessing of the new name was a revelation of his God design, how God made him or who God made him to be. By being named Israel, that means prince. It let him know that God made him to be a prince. Now, his parents had named him Jacob, and they misidentified him as a schemer, because that's what Jacob means, schemer or trickster. And guess what? Because that's what they named him, that's the way they raised him. And because of that misidentification, Jacob thought that he had to scheme and struggle to get anything. And even in that encounter with the angel, he thought that the only way he could get a blessing was to wrestle or to struggle for it. Jacob's blessing was the clarification of his nature and of his purpose. He was supposed to be a prince, not a schemer or a trickster. And a prince doesn't get things by scheming and tricking. He gets things out of his authority and out of his grace. And so the question for us is, how can I know what my design or my purpose is without having to wrestle with an angel? Psalms 139 verses 13 through 16 make an incredible declaration. David says, "For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. And I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance, yet being unformed." In that verse, particularly if you focus on verse 15, it says that God framed you in your mother's womb. He had unique plans for you. Ephesians 1 and 3 says, even before the foundation of the world. And He skillfully framed you for a specific purpose. When you frame a house, you frame it with the end in mind. And because you want a unique house, you frame it with the specific design and plan. And your framing considers the rooms you want, their size and placement. And your framing even takes into consideration the capacity of the house. For example, if you want a second story, or if you're located where there are strong winds or earthquakes. The work on the frame is done so the house can be built to match its design. Now, the same is true about you. Everything is supposed to be built on your purpose frame. When the scripture says that your frame was not hidden from Him, what it means is that God's will for your life is connected to the way He made you, your nature, your personality, your strengths, your capacities, even what you like. And God doesn't call you to do something that's out of line or outside of the way He framed you. These workers have to build on this site according to its frame. Now, God framed you in the womb, and after you were born, everything is supposed to be added to you based on how God framed you. But we all know that's rarely the case. That's why in Proverbs 22 and 6, Solomon tells us to train up a child in the way that they should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, we have misused that scripture in church world to think that it means bring a child to church. Well, what it actually means is to help the child discover their frame, their nature, their personality, their strengths, and their weaknesses. And then out of our life experience, we're supposed to train and direct them based on the uniqueness of their frame. But when parental figures and environment and life experiences don't build according to your frame, then that's why we find it difficult to connect to our purpose. And in truth, we may be framed to be a house, but they try to build on us so that we become a fast food drive-in restaurant. When you're not living from how you were framed, it becomes easy to be frustrated or experience depression. Because when you're working outside of your purpose, you get this sense that what I'm doing doesn't really bring any fulfillment. And that's why you can't wait until the weekend. And you think to yourself things like, I went to school for this, or I don't think I can do this for the rest of my life. And when you're misidentified, you will feel unqualified. And when you don't feel qualified, that's when it's easy to start to talk negative to yourself. And you'll even say things like, who, me? Because you can't imagine God calling you into something great or something huge or something that'll make a massive difference. And when you're uncertain about your frame and your purpose, it's also easy to live in deception. See, you can be deceived by comparing yourself to others. You'll think that you're supposed to be like someone else. And so what you'll do is you'll exhaust your energy and you'll waste your time trying to live like them, and you'll actually be outside of your own nature. And the danger in living in this type of deception is that you seek the counsel of the wrong people, and they can only advise you from their nature. That's why they say things like, "If I were you." They're telling you about their nature. They're not helping you achieve your purpose and live from your frame. Do you know what sin is? Sin actually means to miss the mark. We think of sin as being something vile. And we need to realize that when Satan is tempting you to sin, what he's really doing is trying to lure you to miss the mark. And for believers, missing the mark means missing our purpose. It means that we're functioning outside of our frame and outside of our identity. Think about the critical temptations in the Scripture. Adam and Eve, for example, in the garden. The serpent tempted them to eat of the fruit, and he said to them that if you eat this, you will be like God. In other words, he tempted them to not be settled in their identity and in their frame, but to pursue God's identity. And when we step outside of our own identity, we miss the mark. Think about Jesus when he was tempted in the wilderness. How did Satan tempt him? He said, "If you are the Son." In other words, he was tempting him outside of his nature. And the reason that Jesus did not miss the mark when he was being tempted was because he was secure in his identity. And he didn't have an identity crisis when Satan tempted him, because Jesus knew who he was and he knew how his Father felt about him. "You are my beloved Son," the Father said, "and I'm well pleased with you." Now remember, God said this to him before Jesus had ever done anything. God identifies who we are and how he feels about us. Now, David understood it in our main scripture. He actually declares, "My soul knows this very well." And that's what has to happen to us. We have to know this in our very being. David realized that it was God who framed him. And on that recognition, he said that I'm wonderfully made. He declares himself to be awesome and marvelous. And that's how you and I are supposed to feel about ourselves. And that's not pride. That's understanding who your designer is. That's understanding that the Lord knows how to frame you and that he put purpose in you. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be building on your frame. And I'm going to be affirming to you what God thinks about you and what God really says about you, so that you can understand your purpose and that you can understand your value. Because I want you to know and to walk in the fact that you are a masterpiece. And as you begin to embrace this, you'll actually move closer to the fullness of life that Jesus talks to us about. Oh, and before we close, let me address the main issue of the day. If the way to discover my identity and my purpose is to understand my frame, how do I discover how God framed me? To answer that, I need you to consider these 8 questions. 1, what can I do well that also engages me? 2, where do I have a focus and ideas and creativity and solutions? 3, In what areas do I pursue my curiosity? I don't get tired and want to quit and put it down, but I'm willing to stay there on my own to learn more. 4, what's easy for me to retain and explain? 5, where do I have endurance and even long suffering? In what areas will I put up with more stuff than I will in other areas? 6, what inspires me or what fires up my passion? 7, what do I dream about or what keeps me up at night? And 8, where are my circles of appreciation and celebration? In other words, what are the things that I do that people applaud me for? All of these questions you can find for your consideration on DwayneHunt.org. The call of God may seem big and even scary, but I want to affirm to you that whatever God calls you into, you were framed for it. In other words, He built you for the greatness that He called you into. The ideas and the imagination that He's deposited in you, you're framed to bring those things to pass. And so the challenge for you is not to embrace your fears, but to walk in your faith frame and believe that because God made you for it, He'll give you the grace to accomplish it because you are a masterpiece.
You say I am loved when I can't feel